So cold email still works, and in fact, it actually works better than ever for people that are doing it right. But the gap between people winning with cold email and the people failing with cold email has also never been bigger. So in this video, I want to walk you through exactly what we do so you can be on the winning team with cold email. This is going to be the full system, start to finish. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Nicholas. I'm the founder of ScaleSprint, and we are a B2B outreach company. We're certified and recommended by Instantly.ai, which is the largest dedicated cold email tool in the world. I've generated over 5,000 leads on their platform, and I'm going to walk you through the system now. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is infrastructure. So these are the actual domains and email accounts that you use for the sending. Now, most people know that you should be setting up a dedicated infrastructure of domains. So in other words, you should not be using your main company domain to send cold outreach because this can actually risk completely frying your main domain. I've consulted with some larger sales teams where they've done that because they might be stuck in the past, and it's just completely fried the domain. It affects their internal communication and customer communication and stuff. So it's not a good thing to do. You want to have specific domains that are dedicated to the cold outreach. So you want to make sure these are also branded domains so they reflect the company name, and that all these domains will redirect to the main company website. So even if people put in that domain into if they put that domain into the search bar, they will still get to the main website. So one example you can do here is, if we say your domain is yourbusiness.com, you could set up a domain called yourbusinessteam.com or something like that, where it still reflects the main domain and the branding, but it's a different domain that you're going to be using specifically for cold email, so you can afford to burn it, right? Now, the second thing that we want to have is email licenses that are attached to these domains. Now, for the domains themselves, you can just acquire these wherever you want to, Porkbun, GoDaddy, Namecheap. It doesn't really matter too much. But the email licenses matter a lot. And you can get these from multiple places. You can, go ahead and buy them directly from Google, Microsoft, which is not very appealing because it's quite expensive. You can also get private infrastructure, which I would not recommend because it typically burns quite quickly. So I think the best option is to buy from basically people that are Google resellers. So they're reselling Google accounts at a discounted rate. And this is the best option to go for in terms of just optimizing for costs and also the effectiveness and the email deliverability of these email licenses. Now, there are a lot of different providers of this out there, and we have one in particular that we use, and we've chosen them after vetting a bunch of different Google resellers. So if you want to get access to them and have us run your system, you can check out scalesprint.io. So this is basically what you want to do for the email licenses. Also, another thing that's really important is to basically, if you can, build two layers of infrastructure. So having one that's actively sending and then one that's available if any of the domains in the main infrastructure burns. So you can switch them back and forth. And this is a way of preventing and also fixing email deliverability issues before they happen. Because whenever a domain starts to have a dip in reply rate, it immediately gets switched out with a different domain. And the domain that was already sending gets sent into a warm-up pool so it can sort of regain its reputation, so to speak, through a warm-up process on a tool like Instantly. So that's also something that's very helpful. I would also recommend adding profile pictures to the email accounts because it kind of humanizes the sender a bit. And then I recommend doing a warm up on the accounts of 2 to 3 weeks before you start sending any cold emails. So that kind of covers what we do for infrastructure. The next aspect here is the sending tool. So we use Instantly.ai as our sending tool, and this is just kind of the tool that we've had the best experiences with. There are other good options out there like SmartLead and Email Bison and some of these other ones, but this is just the one we use. And you don't really want to be using some of the legacy tools like Apollo and Mailchimp and some of these older old generation tools, because they are just not optimized for the modern environment of cold outreach. So they don't have a lot of the features that, say, Instantly.ai has. A few examples to include is that the fact that Instantly.ai has a pretty good warm-up pool that you can use, so you can warm up your email accounts directly on Instantly. In addition to that, you can also do randomized sending patterns. They have a built-in spam word detector, spin tags maker, and they also have inbox placement tests, so you can test the deliverability of your domains. And then also they have a great way of categorizing all incoming replies with AI, so you can see who's interested and who's not. And then it consolidates it all into one master inbox called the Unibox. So it's a very good tool to use. And then they also have all these email deliverability features that you need. And so it's just a very, very helpful tool, and it's the best tool to use, in my opinion. So that's what we use for the sending tool. The next aspect here is email deliverability, and a lot of people say that email deliverability is basically 50% of the battle, but most people tend to ignore it, or they don't factor it in as one of the things that can actually make or break a campaign. So there are two different layers that are important when it comes to email deliverability. There's first of all optimizing it, but then also monitoring it. So when it comes to optimizing email deliverability, again, as I mentioned, you want to have multiple domains. You want to be doing warm up. You want to be able to rotate domains. You want to do randomized sending patterns. You want to avoid spam words like free, guarantee, limited time, click here, unsubscribe. If you include some of these words, there's a high likelihood you're going to land in spam. And yeah, also having like a good provider for your email licenses and so on. These are all things that tie into email deliverability. And also there are other words, or there are other things that are more indirectly affecting email deliverability. So one of them is manual spam reports, which a lot of people don't take into account. That one of the biggest factors from the ESP's perspective, so the email service providers, when they decide if a domain is sending spam, is are our users reporting these emails to spam? So if you're sending relevant emails, there's a lot higher chance that you're not going to get reported to spam, because if you send something, you're targeting roofers and you're sending it to IT companies, it's just they're going to report it to spam 100% of the time. So you need to avoid that at all costs. And so that means you need to have good copy. You need to not be too like rude in your email. You need to be respectful, and things like that. And then also you need obviously targeted clean data. So you're actually targeting people that are relevant. Other than that, you want to avoid bounces. So you want to have clean verified data using some sort of email verification tool. So these are all things you can do to optimize email deliverability. But optimizing it is just one bit, because even with the most optimized system, you can still run into email deliverability issues. So you need a system for monitoring it. Now, a lot of people like to track open rates, which is not really a good idea, because it actually installs an open rate pixel into the email, which is a form of like HTML that's going to reduce the sending reputation of that domain, because Google and Microsoft don't like when you send images, HTML, anything like that. So you want to make sure you're not tracking open rate ideally. And then also you want to make sure that the most important metric that you track is actually the reply rate. So how is the reply rate looking? How is it progressing over time? Because if you have a dip in reply rate for no apparent reason, there's a very good chance that is caused by email deliverability. Other than that, you can also check public blacklists, which are basically like these blacklists that exist, where you'll be able to see if your domain is listed there. If it is listed there, pretty much you just need to replace the domain. You can try to get it off the blacklist, but it's not really worth it. So just replace the domain, get a new one instead, if you happen to land on one of those. And then also you can do inbox placement tests, which is basically a system where you can, this is something that some of the sending platforms provide, such as Smartly and Instantly. They have features for this, where you can operate within an isolated system and see if your email's landing in spam. So you have your email accounts, they're sending to emails that Instantly and Smartly already own, and then they report back to you whether or not those emails landed in spam. So that's one way of tracking whether or not you're landing in spam too. So again, to summarize, we have two aspects: optimizing email deliverability using some of the things that I mentioned, and then also tracking it correctly, which is involves some of the things I mentioned before, which is like reply rates, public blacklists, and inbox placement tests, and so on. So that covers email deliverability. Now, the next thing is data acquisition. So how do you actually go about finding the names and email addresses of the people that you want to reach out to? Now, the exact database that you use will, of course, depend on who your target market is. There are a few databases that are quite broad, but you want to make sure that, if you have the chance to, you use a more niche database. So let's take a few examples. If you're targeting e-commerce, you can go with Store Leads, which is a very good database for e-commerce. If you're looking for funded companies, SaaS companies, tech companies, you can go with something like Crunchbase. They have some really good funding data. If you want like finance, PE, family offices, that sort of thing, you can go for a platform like PitchBook. And if you're looking for local businesses, what I always recommend is using Google Maps scraping, which is the best way of finding their information. And then if you're sort of just going broad in a, you're not really, you don't have one particular database that you're going to use, then you can use something like Apollo or LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator doesn't have the emails, so you're going to have to enrich the data through something like Clay. So that is the basic workflow there. Now, one thing that's really important and something that we're using a lot is AI pre-qualification. So essentially, once you have your list from any of these databases, you want to make sure it's actually an accurate list. And the best way to do that is by using AI to go through all the contents on the website of every single lead and then qualifying the leads based on that. So this is something that could just tremendously help you improve your data accuracy, which means you're going to get a higher reply rate, better deliverability for the reasons I mentioned in the deliverability of the video, and also a better just positive reply rate, more engagement, more meetings. So this is a really, really important thing to do. And if you're not doing that, you should absolutely be doing it. And of course, also when it comes to data, you only want to be sending to verified leads. So you want to make sure your lead lists are properly verified. Now, one thing that we often get asked is, okay, well, how often should I be sending emails to these leads? And the thing that we do is we like to think of it in terms of TAM average cycles. So if you have a total addressable market of 50,000 contacts, these like all the people you can possibly reach out to within your market, you basically want to be sending one email sequence to each person within that market once every 2 or 3 months. And so that means you're going to be contacting them repeatedly over the year. The reason why that makes sense is the same reason why you're getting retargeted with ads, right? It's like you see something over and over and you slowly start to familiarize yourself with that concept or with that company, and it increases the chance that you buy over time. So instead of just like blasting your list one time and then saying, oh, yeah, the people that were not interested, they're never going to buy from me anyway, so I'm just, I'm not going to reach out to them ever again. That's completely wrong. You need to think of cold email as a private sending infrastructure in a sense, right? Like you have ads where the infrastructure behind the distribution is owned by Meta, for example. But in cold email, you own this distribution engine, and so you should just be optimizing it as much as you can and reaching out to your market as often as you can, without, of course, like annoying them too much. So kind of doing a TAM recycling play every 2 to 3 months is typically the best way to get the most out of your data lists. The next thing I want to talk about is the scripts. And of course, the scripts are really important when it comes to cold outreach. Not the most important aspect. I think sometimes it gets exaggerated how important it is, but of course, it needs to be done right. It's something that can certainly ruin campaigns if it's done completely wrong. So the first thing to talk about is the subject line. Now, for the subject line, a lot of people tend to just sort of overcomplicate that topic. It's really not that important what your subject line is, but you just want to make sure you're not selling in the subject line. You don't want to mention what you do in the subject line. You really want to just keep it vague. Most people treat their inbox like a to-do list, so you just want to keep it vague, make sure they open the email. And also, this means you also want to keep the preview line, which is the first line of the email that people can see as a preview in their inbox. You also want to keep that vague. And this is typically where you establish your why, and the relevancy in the outreach is typically in that first line. So this is also where you can use some sort of personalization if you want to, or if you're using some sort of intent signal, you can mention that there. So that's the first line. And then from there, there are so many different ways of structuring the email from there that I don't want to like give you one particular structure to use. But what I will say is that a good cold email should definitely have a pain point, and not just a company level pain point, but actually a person level pain point. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at a founder who has equity in a company and you look at the head of marketing, they might care about completely different things. And so you need to really tailor your messaging in a way where it appeals to the specific issues that they care about. And so, if you do have an ICP where it's like, hey, I can sell this to both founders and head of marketing, and I want to target both of them, then you want to make sure that, again, you're looking at person level pain points and not just company level pain points. Another important thing is like this whole discussion about features versus benefits. I think in most cases you want to talk about the benefits, but there are also cases where you need to mention your features, in particular in cases where you're in a very saturated space and you have some sort of unique mechanism, right? Because all your competitors might be saying, oh, we can get you more sales, we can, they're mentioning the benefit, but they're just like blending into everyone else. But if you're talking about some sort of unique mechanism, right? Let's say you're like really good at AI search or something, and you're dealing with an audience that's not really used to that. Well, that's a unique mechanism that you can talk about. And so that's the sort of thing you want to take into account once you do write the rest of your email. Is that, okay, am I going to be focused on benefits primarily, or the features? And again, the saturation of the market and the competition is a good way to decide whether or not to do that. Now, another thing is, of course, social proof, which is really, really important, especially if you have relevant case studies. And so this is typically something that we like to include in the PS line, because it just typically fits nice in the PS line. And then also the call to action as well. The call to action will depend a lot on sort of what you want them to do as the next step. If you have an offer where it's like it's a high friction offer, then typically what you want to do is go for a more soft call to action, maybe a lead magnet or some sort of front end offer or something like that. But if you have a really really strong offer, then you can just directly ask for the call. So that kind of depends on the situation, of course, but that's kind of what we do for the call to actions. Now the next thing is the offer, which is arguably the most important thing, the thing that you need to put the most thought into. Now the offer is basically, what is the prospect getting? What do they get if they reply with interest into your email? Now the definition is a bit broad, but it's again basically just what are they getting. So this could be like, a lead magnet, a front end offer, or maybe you have a certain part of your service that you can deliver for free, or you can maybe do it for a one-time fee, and that naturally ties into your main service or something like that, right? So that's basically what we define as the offer here. It could also be a guarantee, like we will help you get XYZ, or you don't pay, something like that, right? These are all examples of offers that can be used in the emails. And this is the easiest way to increase your positive reply rate, which I think oftentimes is the metric that most people struggle with, is the positive reply rate. This is the easiest way to solve that, like split testing different offers, seeing what really works. And that is what you need to be focusing the most of your attention on, like deliverability, targeting, and offer. If you have these three aspects nailed, it's really hard to fail with cold outreach. So that's the way we think about the offer. It's something that's obviously specific to your business, and I think a lot of this you have to tie into the customer acquisition cost. Like, even if you're like, hey, I actually want to just sell them the retainer immediately, that might be the most appealing thing for you, but it might make sense later down the line if you say, okay, hey, we're going to spend 2 hours doing some free stuff for this client. We're going to consider that part of the customer acquisition cost, and we know that down the line they're going to give us a 50K LTV, so it does make sense for us to do that up front. These are the sort of calculations you want to do with your offer, because it's not always the best thing to just like pitch the main thing in front of their face. So that's how we like to think about the offer. Now the last thing I want to talk about is appointment setting and nurturing. So how do you actually set the appointments once you have somebody that has expressed interest over email? Now, of course, speed to lead is really important. You got to get back to them fast, and also ideally you want to get back to them on multiple channels. So also, once they've expressed interest, you also want to reach out to them on LinkedIn as well, maybe give them a call too, and just make sure you hit them from many different angles. And once you have that interest, you really want to capture it fast. So don't be afraid to, do multiple follow-ups over the next few days on multiple channels. Like, really just go hard to actually set that appointment immediately once they show interest. So that's what you really want to focus on the appointment setting side. This is mainly, I would say, important if you're noticing that hey, I'm actually getting a good reply rate, I'm getting a good positive reply rate, but I'm just not getting enough meetings. Typically, this is where you want to do most of your work, because at that point you might have a great offer, but people are just not booking meetings because your appointment setting process is subpar. And also, of course, what ties into this is nurturing. So even if somebody doesn't book within the first 3 days, you don't just have to let the lead go. You can just put them into an infinite nurturing sequence, and maybe down the line they're going to eventually reach out and they're interested and they want to move forward. So you want to build long nurturing sequences. Typically, the philosophy we have around that is just handling the most common objections one by one in the nurturing sequence and showing a bunch of social proof as well. So that's going to cover it for this video here. This was just a walkthrough of some of the most important aspects of building a successful cold email system in 2026. If you want to have me directly build and run your system, you can check out the link in the description. You can book a meeting with me and we can have a chat. I can see if I can help. So thanks for watching and have a good day.